How many times a day do you find yourself trying to figure out what ambiguously named variables represent? Names like data, item, I, X, Y, row, column. Regardless how the code got to this state, wouldn't it be nice to add some clarity? I've got an example of this ambiguity in a method to calculate compound monthly returns. Pause the video and take a second to read through the implementation. How long did that take? If you're like me, it probably took a minute or two to think through the implementation and double check in my mind what was going on versus the names of some of the variables. What if you could save your future self and others the translation effort when exploring code? Let's walk through what it does and make some comments as we go. The first ambiguous variable that sticks out to me is the data parameter. At this point, I'm not certain what this represents, so I'll leave a comment to come back to it. Moving on, I encounter a count and compound return variable. Again, I'm not sure what we're counting, but count is a red flag, so I'll leave a comment to come back to it as well. Next, I see item, yet another red flag I'll have to come back to. Though I know I'll have a better idea of what this is if I can first figure out what data is. Moving into the loop, I see we're counting the number of items in data. I'll take a note of that as well in my earlier comment. Next, I see we're adding 1 to each item and multiplying the result with the total compound return variable. And finally, something familiar. Item appears to be a rate of return for a period, and presumably by the name of the method, probably a month. I have a clearly named variable, compound return, which seems to back up my suspicion as well. Let's rename item to monthly return and see what that looks like. As a side note, to rename variables, I encourage using an automated refactoring tool. That way, we can focus on clarifying the names and not on executing the rename refactoring. This avoids manual mistakes and probably most concerns about breaking the code. This will also allow us to exploit this refactoring much more frequently. I personally prefer ReSharper to do all of my refactorings. So let's rename item to monthly return. Now that we've done that, we can drop the comment to look into what item represents. And I could be wrong about what item represents. If you aren't certain about something you want to rename, ask someone else on your team. Track down the original authors and talk to them if possible. It's a great learning opportunity. Now that we have an idea of what item is, we have an idea of what data is. It's a list of monthly returns. So let's rename data to monthly returns. And we can now remove our comment to look into what data represents. Finally, we know that count is the number of items in data. We've got that in our comment above. And we now know that data is a list of monthly returns. Therefore, count seems to be the number of months. So let's rename it as well. And of course, we can now remove our last comment to look into what count represents. As I read the last line of code, I can easily see that not a number is returned if there are no monthly returns. Okay, that makes sense. Otherwise, we take the nth root of the compound return, where n is the number of months. This, to me, confirms my suspicions that the renames are reasonable clarifications of the variable names. Now, we don't always have enough code to verify our suspicions. If not, try looking at test code or consumer code. In this case, how the method is used can shed light on that original data parameter. I can find usages of compound monthly return with ReSharper. To do this, just right-click on the method compound monthly return name and hit Find Usages. There are a few test cases that come up. Unfortunately, the data parameter is all referred to as input data, which doesn't help clarify things much. Ask yourself, which version of the code would you rather maintain? If you aren't convinced, try writing out an explanation using the variable names before and after our refactorings. What sounds better to you? Multiply the results of adding 1 to each item, then take the nth root where n is the count of the data? Or after our renaming, multiply the results of adding 1 to each monthly return, then take the nth root where n is the number of months? To me, the first explanation was awkward and difficult to follow. If explaining code with the existing names of variables is confusing, that's probably another reason to rename them. All of us read a lot of code every day. When we're learning a new code base, when we're reviewing our own code, when we're reviewing other people's code, even when we're revisiting past code. When you find ambiguously named variables, I encourage you to rename them. Take a step down the path to clarifying the code for your future self and everyone else.